it took me a long time, but it was work, and it was beautiful work by the end. But when I got to a stage where I could just go, okay, I know where this is in my body. I can feel this desire. I can feel this tension, and I have to find another way to resolve that tension, because any kind of desire, any kind of emotional stress shows up as tension in the body, and tension seeks resolution. So do we do the porn thing, which will only end up in one outcome, and a depletion of energy the older we get as well? Or do we do the challenging work of recognizing and then finding a healthy way to express that tension?
My guest today is Richard Ayling. Richard is a coach, consultant, and retreat facilitator working in the personal development and corporate wellness space. He helps professionals and entrepreneurs create healthier relationships and mental well-being through self-leadership and emotional strength training. He combines over 30,000 hours as a communication skills coach with extensive knowledge of mindset and embodiment work to design and facilitate corporate wellness programs and retreats internationally. His mission in men's work is to redefine healthy masculinity, to help men bring more depth and value to their world, to support each other more, to lead with emotional intelligence, and to communicate in healthier ways. Rich successfully overcame an autoimmune disease, is a recovering nice guy, and was one of the first instructors trained by Wim Hof. I loved this conversation with Rich as we dive into subjects pertaining to men's work and masculinity that don't get a lot of airtime. We delve into a wide array of subjects, including the nuances of modern masculinity and the challenges that men face when seeking support in today's world. The conversation also explores the nice guy syndrome and dives into the qualities that men can nurture within themselves to foster more balanced and healthier relationships. In this episode, you can expect to learn the positive impact and tangible benefits of men's work and men's circles, the impact of pornography on mental health and intimacy, and more about Rich's own personal growth journey and how to cultivate self-worth. Before we dive into today's conversation, just a final reminder that this is your last week to access the Unhooked online course. 2 years ago, I decided to turn my 10 years of teaching and coaching experience into an accessible self-study program called Unhooked Recovery. I wanted to share exactly how I had broken free from addiction using a combination of behavioral science, meditation, and a proven roadmap for recovery so that you could do the same. And I am proud of the results that this course has created, helping people just like you break free from addiction at the root source, let go of shame, and cultivate a life of deeper meaning, purpose, and integrity. Now, it may sound surprising that I'm closing down access to the Unhooked Recovery program for now. I've come to the realization that I can make this course even better and provide even more value to you. And I want to level up on everything I'm working on, and that includes this course. If you are already a member of Unhooked Recovery, nothing will change for you, so don't worry. You still have full access to the course, including all of the future updates. However, if you haven't yet become a member of Unhooked Recovery, I didn't want to close the doors without any warning. So it will be available for the same price for the next 7 days. And when I launch Unhooked Recovery 2.0 later this year, I'll be moving the price from $297 to $997, as it will include private calls with me and much more. So if you've ever thought about joining, or if you are struggling with how to break free from addiction, this is the last time you can join before we close access on the site and raise the price by $700. So I hope to see you inside Unhooked Recovery. Now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Richard Ayling.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz, and I am so excited today to bring on my dear friend, Rich. Rich is someone who I met a couple years ago. We got introduced by a mutual friend who knew that we would connect, we would click. And Rich was kind enough to invite me onto his podcast and talk about, issues related to porn. And it's a beautiful podcast that I highly recommend you check out, Man Reimagined. And what I love about Rich is the kind of balanced and nuanced perspective on masculinity and what it means to be a man in today's society. And it's a topic that, as hopefully we're going to dive into today in this podcast, it's tricky to have this conversation, particularly in today's age where everything is very fiery. And so I just love how Rich is able to talk about these things in such a balanced way with a lot of wisdom and a lot of compassion. And I know that for you, the listeners out there, you're going to get tons of great insight from this conversation. So, Rich, I just want to welcome you to the show. Welcome.
Thank you for the extremely kind introduction. It's really nice to be here and connect with you again.
Yeah. And it's not just your wisdom, your silky voice is just something that we had to have back on the podcast. It's the accent and the silkiness of it. So I know that you were going to inspire a lot of people. And, to digress a little bit more before we dive in, I was listening to a conversation you had with someone else, and you were talking about how you don't like the term role model anymore. And we could get into why you maybe don't like that term, but I do actually consider you as someone that is a very healthy role model or a good example of what it means to be a man and how to balance, the masculine and feminine, how to talk about feelings and get in touch with your emotions. So I just really think that you're going to be a good example for a lot of the listeners out there today.
Again, thank you. I will try desperately to live up to that.
Yeah, no pressure. So, to start off with, starting where I just left off, masculinity does seem to be, in some ways, an almost controversial topic today. It's talking about masculinity is asking for, something. You're kind of putting a bullseye on your back from both sides in some ways. And I'm just curious, why do you think that is? What is it about this topic that is so controversial?
Where do we begin? I feel like what we're not doing so well as a society is kind of holding more than one idea at a time. Like, for example, women's struggles and women's rights. As much as, things are going well for them and they're expanding and it's an exciting time for them, and I fully love that, they're still experiencing lots of challenges. Roe versus Wade being reversed in America, just being one, of a million things that are currently post Me Too very alive. There's race, there's plenty of topics out there, LGBTQ. And so when men also put their hand up and say, we're not doing so great, or what about us, or in any way trying to also point out that men are struggling, and we are statistically, but I can go into it. It's almost like society is unable to hold like more than one idea at the same time. And that's a problem. The timing's not ideal, just because it feels like there's almost a reaction to it. And in some circles there are. I think that, what it means to be a man is a big question. I think also that men are kind of splintering into very sort of different factions, if you will. And the idea of even what men's work is really up in question. I'm involved in the European men's movement, and there's just no agreement there in kind of what way to go. You can contrast the European men's movement with how Americans, for example, like to go about it. And there's no right or wrong here. There's just like what's helpful and what's not. And who are we really talking to, and then where are we coming from? I feel like there's a reaction a lot of the time. There's a lot of burying our heads in the sand. And so when men do step up and try and say what they're thinking and feeling, it's just not always skillful. It's not always nuanced. And even if it is, it's not being well received, because even if you do try and make a good point, there are a lot of, say, women, for example, that are just like kind of tired of hearing about it, or not ready to talk about it, because not women's fault, but as a society, we're just not very good at holding lots of ideas at the same time. There's a lot of stress going around. So I feel like I've opened a few cans of worms there, and over to you. Which one you want to talk
Yeah.
about?
Well, I'm curious what it is that calls you to this line of work. Like what happened in your life? What was there a moment or, an incident that happened that got you into maybe your own inner work or men's work, and has brought you to this place?
The two different answers, I guess. If we zoom out and go back to why I got into the whole idea of inner work and found my way onto this path of self-development and also trying to support and help others. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease back when I was 26. I've managed to overcome and heal it completely, meaning I have no symptoms to this day, and I'm symptom-free, medication-free for like at least 10 years now. That was work to overcome that. What got me there was a sense of not really knowing who I was, being very frustrated in life, very angry, very depressed, not being in a job that in any way inspired me. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So that stress caused inflammation, caused this illness. And, I've spent many years learning about myself, learning about kind of healthy modalities and experimenting. There's no one path for everyone, but I've taken a fair amount of time to learn how to be healthier. Still a massive work in progress. And that took me to becoming one of the first Wim Hof method instructors in the world. I just got lucky in discovering it before it got really big, and signing up for what was to be the first round of international instructors, and something else very interesting to people. And, God help you if you're a coach or a healer starting out today without some kind of very trendy, or hot kind of modality, because it's really hard to get out there. But for me, it was like red carpet in everywhere I went. So I'm very blessed that I sort of discovered that. Moving on and developing, growing, becoming a yoga instructor, getting involved in embodiment practices, and deepening my coaching, I found myself entering the field of men's work. A friend of mine, I think the first circle I actually joined was around the same time I discovered the Wim Hof method, because it was one of the sort of to-be instructors that invited me along to a men's circle. And I thought, okay, it's a bunch of men that sit in a circle. I didn't realize it was a thing. And that experience was actually quite full on. I can sort of share some weird stories about that, but it introduced me to the idea of men sitting around together and just kind of supporting each other. And for me, as I now understand myself to be a recovering nice guy, that felt much more comfortable around women than I did around men, especially men that expressed any sense of masculinity, healthy or not, because my own relationship was so corrupted to it. That made me kind of really uncomfortable. And so then learning, like, actually, it feels pretty good to be around men when it's done in a cool and safe way. And I found myself living in Bali and joining circles there, becoming good friends with the guy who ran it, who now is my co-presenter on the Man Reimagined podcast, and taking over the circle when he wasn't there, and really just coming to a place of like, my God, I've spent my whole life not wanting to be around men. It felt so uncomfortable. Now I've understood why. A lot of it had to do with the relationship to my father, my grandfather, that lineage, and also just kind of English men and sort of laddish culture. As a sensitive young boy, I really struggled with that. But learning what healthy masculinity actually meant and learning to embody that through the support of other men has been one of the most profound, life-changing experiences. So if you think I look kind of or speak in any way in a balanced way about masculinity and femininity, like, God help you if you'd have met me before 2016, I would have been very uh, negative about men, I think. So I'm really grateful that I've healed those wounds, and the relationship to my own father is like excellent now. And I can now offer other men an opportunity to do the same, because it changes the way that you relate to yourself, you relate to other men, show up in your relationships, as well as your kind of your career and how you actually get what you want without being a dick about it.
Um, I'd love for you to kind of talk about, you talked about maybe pre 2016 when you might have been a different person in terms of your relationship with men, um, and what was different back then, like, because what strikes me is that for many people who have never been to a men's group or men's circle or done any kind of men's work at all, it's almost like that analogy of the water that you're swimming in, that you don't know you're swimming in water because you've been swimming in it your whole life. And it's like, what? There's no concept that being in a circle with men and expressing your emotions or any of this men's work can even be important. And so I'd love for you to talk maybe first about what are the consequences of not having a healthy relationship with men?
I'll speak from experience and some of the men that I've worked with. But if we gravitate, for whatever reason, towards women predominantly, we feel safe around them because we're more sensitive, because we want to, we're good at expressing our emotions, or we feel like we need to do that, then our relationships with them tend not to be always very healthy either, in a kind of romantic sense. And then we start to need to talk about polarity. And when I talk about polarity, I'm not interested in like men behave in masculine and the women behave in the feminine. I think this is a really tired, outdated, and poorly understood and yet much talked about kind of concept of polarity. But I mean to say that these masculine traits of being able to say what you fucking want and think and lead yourself through life and not people please. Like, you learn that from being around other men, because typically men are very good at doing that. They're not so good at the kind of nurturing, empathetic, compassionate, kind of emotional intelligence spectrum side of things, by and large. And so if you only hang around with men, you're good at doing that kind of thing. And if you are very good at hanging around with women, then you're going to miss out on those kind of skills. So for me and a lot of men that I know, it's that, well, yeah, I'm hanging around with women, but actually I want more from a lot of these relationships. And yet I haven't got the wherewithal, the courage to actually just say, hey, look, I actually really like you. Or if I do, then it gets way too late and I'm already friends. That's, or just continually attracting and going for women that were emotionally unavailable, so that they get something out of this dynamic. I give them a lot of attention without actually saying the thing that I want, which is more than just kind of being around them. And, a lot of people get caught up in this unhealthy relationship. And so that was kind of me for many years. And by hanging around more with men and talking about some of the skills of masculinity, if you will, and I wish we had other words for that. I wish we had other words for that, because it will just, so many people, when I talk about masculine skills or qualities, they start to associate them with being, there are things that men do and that, women might not, and vice versa for femininity. So this is a problem. And maybe we can open that discussion as to what these qualities are, but talk about them from a perspective of, we all have these qualities inside us. And yet typically how we're still raised in society, women tend to embody more of the feminine and tend to embody more of the masculine, but a healthy integration is learning to do both. And that's why I see women exploding right now through having much more opportunity through work, career, like women's empowerment. Like, they're learning to do a lot of this masculine self-leading stuff, so that they have this question of, what do I actually need a man for? And then in relationship, a lot of very tough women are kind of struggling to trust and let a man into their life. Like, what role do they actually play? Which is a really fair question. So if we pull that apart and go back to your original question, I would say that being around men helps me to feel less distracted by the feminine and actually more focused on my self, like my sense of direction, my purpose, and helps me not be so dependent and needing to be mothered often by the feminine, by women, because I never made that cut myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that you've mentioned now a couple times, which I also really resonate in the work that you do, is talking about the nice guy syndrome. And this is something that definitely showed up in my life. It still shows up in my life, and it's something I'm working through. And I think a lot of the listeners can resonate with this, is wanting everyone to see you as a good person, not wanting to ruffle any feathers, always wanting to be not confrontational. And the consequences of that is you often don't speak up for what you want. You don't know how to express your needs or express when things aren't going how you want, and just to say, hey, I'm not okay with this. And so all this people pleasing, not really saying how you feel, what you want, is a problem. And I can definitely see that one of the benefits of these, of men's groups and men's circles, is having, good role models of how to actually do some of these things, how to speak up and say, this is what I want, how to be more, standing in your power. I'm curious, what are some of the other kind of tangible benefits you've seen in your life after getting involved with men's work? Or what do you see from other people, maybe some of the people you work with, your clients?
There's a much clearer sense of self-worth. And it's one of the most important things that we can have as human beings, yet alone as men. And if we distinguish self-esteem from self-worth, self-esteem is feeling good about yourself based on these external factors in the world, like achievements, like getting the girl, having a good body, getting a raise. But how do you feel when you don't get these things? Because you can't control these things, they don't always work out. Are you a friend to yourself when these things aren't going so well? Self-worth is that sense of I'm worth something, irrespective of how these other aspects in my life are going. I don't collapse. And being around other men, there's just, I don't know if you felt it, being in a circle of men. Well, that doesn't mean sitting around a fire and taking our tops off and covering ourselves in war paint and fucking bellowing, chanting together. Like, it's fine. I'm sure there's value in doing that. I just mean just being around other men. There's something profound about it. And the practices of, say, presence that when you practice together, you take out into the real world. There's a really tangible benefit. Like, if we talk about the feminine as kind of chaos and distraction and movement, and it's there to entice us, and we can talk beyond gender about this. Like our practice, if we want to work on our masculinity, it's like training a simplicity of being present and not being distracted. And so being more disciplined, having a sense of impulse control, because you actually got the long game in sight. This is useful for women as well. It's beyond gender. I mean that. But when men come together, like there's just a feeling, I can't describe it, that is really appreciated. And then you can take that out. And so benefits of men's work, whether it's 6 weeks, whether it's 6 months, it's like, I want to connect to more men and I'm not afraid to. And I can look at another man in the eye and be like, how's it going, brother?
Yeah,
simple thing, but it's missing. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of inferiority out there between us. And it's like, it's not necessary. And once you learn to hold yourself from a place of self-worth, it actually creates and breeds trust with another man. Because he's like, this man's got himself. I can trust that. I can relax.
yeah. And there's a sense of brotherhood, or just kind of being on the same team, as opposed to, my experience for many years of when I come into the presence of another man, there's kind of this immediate almost fear or tension. Like, do I need to prove myself? Is this an enemy? Is this someone I need to be on the lookout for? There's a combativeness almost that has nothing to do with the other person. It's just my own, the fear and insecurity of being someone who didn't have healthy male relationships or masculine friendships. And one of the benefits that I've seen is just that sense of, hey, we're in this together. We're on the same team. We're not alone here, and we can support each other, which is such a transformational shift in just my own sense of well-being when I'm around other men.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I'm happy you got to experience that. And guess what? Like any man that comes to a circle is more silent for in his first moments because he's just trying to get his bearings. It's like, what is this? Am I safe here? You know, like there's a lot of energy in the room. Men give off that. They just, I don't know how to say or describe it or justify it. I don't want to. It's just like I experience it. And so a man's just finding his place in that. And then the moment he starts to clock that these other men aren't a threat and they're just open and checking in with what's going on about them in their lives. And it doesn't have to mean deep emotional breakdowns and like deep eye gazing and intimate hugging. Like that's, you know, that's also normal. There's various forms out there. Let's put it that way. That's a bit full on for a first event, right? But just being in that space and going, "Ah," and so many men in my experience come to that and go, wow, I didn't know so many people felt the same way as I did about so many subjects. I didn't realize it was okay to feel these things as well. So like the
Yeah.
key point that you mentioned was we just didn't have healthy role models. And most of our parents didn't have healthy role models. Like there's many reasons for that. Can talk about that, you know, going back to the last couple of world wars and traditional roles and everything kind of changing like in the last 50, 60 years dramatically. And so there's so many kind of questions that men face and so many roles that women are taking on, which is great, but men are just in that space of what's going on here. And that kind of not knowingness gets passed down. And so a lot of men tend to just not say anything at all and repress their emotions. And there's statistics out there to show that, you know, the current batch of, what was it, millennials, I can't keep up with these phrases, but between sort of like 18 and 35, like men in Germany, boys, we should really say, especially the younger ones, you know, they do suppress their emotions. They do, if they get ill, they don't say anything because they'll assume this thing will get better on its own. There's such a tendency throughout time with men to not express that there's something wrong because that can be perceived as a sign of weakness. And that's one of the most ridiculous, fucked up things. And yet there's a very good reason for that, right? And so when we start to be expectations, roles, et cetera, so when we start to dissolve these roles, we start to talk about what does being a man mean for you? What does masculinity look like in your life? And I like to talk about like a spectrum of masculine and feminine skills that kind of have opposites. And where do you find yourself on the spectrum? Are you playing kind of notes that are kind of more feminine, typically like a sensitive, nice guy like me? Great. But what about these notes over here? Do you reckon you could learn to play some of them? And how would that help you in your life? Not to abandon an aspect of you, not to behave like some kind of ideal, but just to learn to play more keys because it just sounds nicer. And that will help you in life.
Yeah. You mentioned, you know, like the millennials, younger, you know, boys really just feel unable to express themselves and maybe they don't have anywhere to do it. And I think one of the things we've both talked about is emotional isolation and just how damaging it can be to be isolated and to suppress your emotions, suppress your feelings, not be able to get in touch with them and express them. Why do you think it's so hard for us men to be vulnerable, to open up?
Because we haven't been given healthy examples by other men, by and large. When you look at the men in positions of authority and power or an influence in society, there are some good men out there, but they're not the ones that tend to be in the limelight, you know? Like men in positions of power are, you know, generally not well behaved, generally not that cultured in emotional intelligence. But moments of it really land with people, and you're starting to see like film stars like Timothée Chalamet, whatever his name is, the French sex bomb, being a softer, more vulnerable, kind of open side to him, which women are really interested in, but there's no demonstration of how he lives and behaves. We don't get to see what that actually looks like. So this is kind of one of the major problems. And you've got people like our old friend Andrew Tate, who, you know, like is so popular, it's scary. And my thesis on this is that he's the closest thing we've got to a man in society who's genuinely successful and expressing who he is and what he wants. And that's what men or young boys are looking up to, some role model of like, okay, this guy is getting what he wants in life, because that now I can trust that and I can feel safe. That's kind of a tragic thing, because he's not a great human in my eyes. He's not helpful in kind of how he's going about things. He's not someone to look up to, and his current legal troubles kind of attest to that. But that's kind of where we're at. Boys in school, they're just looking for some form of like helpful, or that's the wrong word. Sorry. They're looking for some kind of man that is, successful and doing well. And even when selling things to men, still in marketing, you'll do well. You'll do extremely well if you sell the idea of being successful, making money, getting girls and having a good body. These are still the things that show up in kind of men's desires. And so there's something deeply rooted in our societal fabric, which needs to be unwoven. That's not too abstract, and it doesn't come from men being shamed constantly, which is also really big in the societal narrative at the moment, especially old white men, etc. So I don't want to open the kind of racial can of worms. I don't want to get into that. But men are not popular. White men are extremely unpopular at the moment, and I get it. But like how we treat each other in these sort of changing times and in this phase of society, in this phase of history, is really important. And men and young boys are being told that they're not relevant, they're not helpful, they're not really welcome, they're not useful. When you're looking at dating, women have much, much higher standards now, and men are falling behind. They're not able to engage. They're not able to be interesting. They're not emotionally intelligent, witty. They're not confident. And so they end up just becoming incels or just disappearing offline and then getting into porn and addiction and trying to get those needs met that way. And that's where someone like your good self comes in to go, hey, well, not the answer, man. Trust me, I've been.
Yeah.
So I wish I could be more succinct, but like, I feel like this is, it's a complex issue, but we're just not being given very positive messages as boys and men at the moment. And that's having an impact, and it's also understandable as well. So it's tricky.
Yeah. And I think there was a light bulb moment for me just now when you brought up how we as men just don't have good role models for actual skills of how do we navigate the world in a skillful and healthy way as men. Because even the ones that we're seeing in the movies that we're watching, in social media, TV, famous politicians, we're not actually, we might look at someone like, okay, well, Brad Pitt, and okay, maybe he's got a soft side to him, but we're not actually seeing him in a men's circle, expressing his vulnerabilities or what went wrong. And we're just kind of looking at these icons far away and saying, oh, that's the perfect man, but we don't actually know how to do that. Whereas I think women have much more access to these kinds of things for each other, women's circles and women's retreats. And it's a bit more socially acceptable for women to be in a feminine retreat and these things. Whereas, thank God that you're there doing what you're doing and giving some opportunity for men to connect in this way. But by and large, it's still very rare to find men's circles and men's retreats and places where men can actually go and learn about masculinity in a healthy way, aside from, like you said, someone like Andrew Tate. So it makes sense that it's complicated.
Yeah. And, when you mentioned women going off into kind of women's retreats, I mean, women just invest in retreats. They can just be self-care retreats where they just chill out and do yoga and, detox and cool. Like, men don't tend to do that. They don't tend to invest in a self-care retreat. That's just, what's the point? They'll much prefer to, go on a surf trip or there's something much more engaging. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Maybe that's a very natural thing to do. And that's like a way to also recalibrate and rejuvenate for sure. But you're right. It's not in any way normal to go off and do men's work and to sit in circle. It sounds quite scary for a lot of men. That's the feedback I get. It's like, well, why would I do that? What's in there? Oh, there's a lot actually, but you won't find out until you actually show up. And no man that's shown up has ever regretted it, but it's that first step of, I want more from my connection to myself, from the connections I have to other men. I want to understand my emotions better. Like, there has to be a real desire for that before men will actually overcome this kind of hump of, I mustn't show weakness anyway, because vulnerability means weakness. That's kind of the association that I hear men describe a lot of the time, whereas actually it's like an incredible strength. So it's about showing what isn't working in your life in order to become whole. But we're just not well versed in that because we've been told to, stiff upper lip, pull yourself together, be a man, etc. And these tropes are still affecting us, I think.
What are some of the, if we were to really define what healthy masculinity is, what are the qualities, what are the characteristics? And I like that, I think we're both on the same page here, that it's not about, whether what sex you are born with, whether you were born as a biological male or born as a biological female. These are characteristics and qualities that people from either sexes can tap into. Maybe people who are born male have more masculine traits in general. And of course, it's a continuum, it's a spectrum. But when we are to really actually define it and say, here are some healthy masculine traits, what would you say those traits are? And I imagine there's a bunch, but yeah, what comes to mind for you?
With the caveat that, again, these belong to all humans, right? And healthily expressed masculinity to me is a sense of relaxed confidence. It's a sense of taking risk. It's a sense of purpose, direction, leadership. These are pretty good traits to start off with, I would say.
And I love,
go on.
Just as you're saying them, and this is one of the things I love about these kind of topics, is just as you're saying these qualities, it inspires me. It's like, yes, like I want to cultivate these things within myself. Like, yeah, I want to be a protector. I want to take risks. I want to have this kind of calm sense of grounded confidence. And it's inspiring. And I think that's why it's beneficial to look into. But I interrupted and you were going to say something else.
No worries. I was going to flip and contrast them to like what healthy femininity might look like. And that's the ability to compassionate, nurturing, unconditional love. And again, it's not about men and women. It's about the fact that sometimes it's difficult to do both of these at the same time. For example, if you are running a team or, it's your startup, you're in a position of authority and responsibility. And you've got someone on your team that maybe they're a friend and they need the money, but they are so whack at their job that you need to let them go because what they're doing is impacting the whole operation. Now, unconditional love and nurturance and compassion is going to make it more difficult for you to be like, you need to leave. You need to go. I've given you enough chances and I've tried to help you, but you need to get out of here. You know what I mean? So we need to also have the sharpness, the precision to like do what's actually necessary. Now, only doing that is kind of where we mess up. And the unhealthy version of masculinity, which is like, you're fired, get the fuck out. I'm rich, doesn't matter. We only take care of ourselves. That's sharpness and precision, but there's just no care for the other person. And so they're kind of opposites in a way. And the ultimate integration is learning to do both of these things. And so when we see more women in places of leadership, it's really interesting because they bring something different. Unless they're trapped and looking up to and just doing what other men have done typically and done that kind of, harshness, then that doesn't feel like them actually. But like women bring in something different, and so we can learn from them. But ultimately, we need that sharpness no matter what kind of gender we have. We need to be able to have that sense of healthy masculinity, which is not always going to land well with people, but it's what needs to be done. And that's some of these skills that I would class as masculine. And again, I wish I had a better word.
Yeah.
Some of these skills, they're lacking. And as we move into this very sensitive time in life where a lot of people are very easily offended about things, like the sharpness to actually go, no, that's what that needed to be said, and you need to receive that, for example, and just not like collapse and apologize under pressure. Like, so some of these skills that I'm talking about, they're being lost actually. And we're moving too much. And I don't want to say too feminine, please God, no, because that's just going to get misunderstood. But if we don't have this healthy balance between these two things, then we're all over the place as a species.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm just reflecting on some of the things from my own life where I was recognizing how powerful this work of men's work was. And I remember reading, I think it was in the book around No More Mr. Nice Guy, talking very much about the nice guy syndrome. And I recognized within my own life that, I grew up in a very liberal family with all women. My parents were divorced. I was mostly raised by my mom, I had two sisters. It was a very, feminine in terms of like women's empowerment, all these kind of things, which is great. But I also recognize that, in some ways there's toxic masculinity kind of going both ways, where you can be hyper masculine in an unhealthy way of we must be all stoic and no emotion. And there's another form of kind of toxic masculinity that I had noticed myself going into, which is anything looking the slightest bit like that was part of the patriarchy and was unhealthy and was contributing to this oppression of women. And so that, turned me into this very kind of apologetic, people pleasing, I want to be so supportive of women that, you can't tell anyone what to do. You can't take a stand. You can't make anyone feel bad. You have to be a peacekeeper at all times. And like you said, there are moments where you need to come in and say, this is inappropriate. We're not doing this. Or I'm sorry, I have to let you go. And there are moments where you have to be that kind of firm. You can't be a peacekeeper. And it's one of the reasons I see so much benefit in just what you're talking about, like learning how to do these skills that take a lot of nuance and understanding to be in a skillful range. Because if you take it too far, then you're, Mr. Tate, who's toxic in that way. And if you don't take it far enough, then you're just a people-pleasing person that doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, how do you find that balance?
It's an art form. It takes practice. But once you know what it is, once you know and you get a sense for, okay, it's called integrity, like doing the right thing in the right moment, and it takes practice, but it's like, well, I kind of know what needs to be done said here. It often means that we're often bringing our own stuff into this and our own histories and these kind of neural pathways that are so kind of concretely grooved that we catch ourselves after the event going, why didn't I just say that I didn't want to go to the cinema tonight? Okay. And then then I go into a shame or a frustration. And then this is where emotional work comes in. Okay. This is my stuff. Okay. Now how do I skillfully express to my partner, hey, you know what? I messed up. I'm sorry. What I actually meant to say was X, Y, Z. So it's a challenge because it's not just learning, it's unlearning how you've been behaving as well. And again, just to throw in, this is not just skills for men. It happens to be the area that I've been focusing on, but I'm also developing programs for women because God knows there are enough women out there that are people pleasing and, very, very nice girls and guys, girls, nice women that also have the same challenges. And so that's where the most profound growth often has been coming, when women are just learning to be like sharp and decisive and go, okay, this guy's out of my life, and the guy's just left. They go, oh, what's going on? We're catching up with women. So that's why I've been focusing on men, but this is stuff for everybody. But coming back to your question, it's practice. And we've got our own biases a lot of the time, don't you find? And, we can bring in stuff about, oh, this is about men or this is about women. And we need to, my opinion, step way back away from social media. Well, you might have found this podcast. So there's some merits in social media, but the extremes with which that kind of talks about these kind of topics is really unhelpful. And it means stepping away from that and actually coming back to who you are as a human, where you stand on this spectrum, where you need to expand, and how you can do that in relation, whether that's to your partner, whether that's to your friends, whether that's in your job, and just let go and ignore a lot of the blah, blah out there, because that's actually, it's not helping. It's not nuanced. Nothing on social media is. That's why I don't have many followers, I think. Because some of us used to watching reels has turned this podcast off already. It's like, well, this guy's long-winded. It's like, yeah, it's just, that's also a skill. But that's how it works. That's relationships. If we apply that kind of short-sightedness to relationships, and it's a lack of attention as well. It's like, okay, the relationship gets interesting when the honeymoon period is over, when you've finally seen each other without your projections, and you're like, oh, this is going to be work now. But most people are like, oh, they're not my soulmate. I'll check out. So there's so much there to talk about in terms of the romantic aspect, because that's the most interesting to me. That's when we talk about being in relation, that's the most interesting. That's where all of our stuff comes up. And that's where learning to understand not what it means to be masculine and feminine. So you go and be masculine and I'll go and be feminine. That's ridiculous. How do we relate to each other, and what are our expectations and hopes of each other? That's kind of where it's really at.
Yeah. I see that why you wish we had different terms for the masculine, feminine thing, because it's almost distracting to the point where it becomes this arbitrary, very gendered, very divisive, politicized conversation of, well, that's not, all men, and that's not, but instead, it's really just, how are we showing up in our relationships? How are we showing up towards ourselves? And are there areas where we need to have more balance? Are we being too people pleasing and sacrificing ourselves? And do we need to move back towards a balance on that? Are we being too callous and not compassionate? And do we need to move to a place of more balance there? And we could just let go of the term masculine and feminine and just say, how can we be more balanced on these different skills and these different ways of being that we need for living in a healthy way? I'd love to, but yeah, go for it. I don't want to cut you off.
Final piece, polarity and kind of working with these extremes is exciting and is helpful in the bedroom. That's what keeps sex interesting. One person kind of penetrates typically, one person receives, but then reversing that role, whether that's physically or just a woman getting on top of the guy, that's actually really exciting. And that shows up, that I find that really interesting too. That's pretty cool. And again, how can we learn from people that are not just limited to this polarity, masculine, feminine aspect? For example, a gay man, when they meet and they decide to fuck or make love or however they want to describe it, because these are different things, there's always a conversation at the beginning, which is, what do you like? Where are you at? Because there's not an assumption about who penetrates who. This kind of, right? That's just with their anatomy. That's just how that works. And it's cool. And so suddenly they just open up. I like being like this, or I love it when this happens. And we don't do that. And so rather than being stuck in the extremes of masculine and feminine, which I think I've kind of made that point really clear, it's how do we do away with that and just all of us learn to expand into this spectrum and learn what it is that we actually like, where we are naturally, the opposite of that, which is actually kind of our shadow and kind of exciting and kinky, actually, if we bring it into the bedroom, and then that can show up in real life differently too. But I feel like I'm going down a dark, sexy hole, and you wanted to go somewhere else.
Dark, sexy hole. That's the title of my next podcast. Well, as you're saying this, it's just, it's making me think we could probably have a whole podcast conversation on these topics of attraction, of polarity, of healthy intimacy, and being in relationship, because there is so much there to explore. And I think there are lots of topics to explore, particularly around relationships and keeping relationships healthy and happy and keeping them exciting. And as you say, that polarity is so important. And there's many ways, both physical and emotional, to keep that polarity alive. But I want to explore another topic, which, when we're talking about men's groups, and again, we can kind of let go of the kind of the masculine, feminine, and just say, okay, when we get together as men in these safe spaces, and one of the things I love about it is a safe space to come as you are and just show up and say, this is what I'm struggling with. And you almost always find that you are not alone, and that whatever you're struggling with, other people are struggling with too. And from my own experience, one of the topics that comes up so often in men's groups is porn and sexuality, and some of the, the people's struggles with pornography. And I know you mentioned to me before coming on that you'd be, happy and willing to talk about just your own experience with it. And I'm wondering if you could just share, what is your experience with porn, and maybe, your own journey of dealing with the substance.
I like that. Yeah, this is where a part of my brain clicks and goes, your mum may well be listening to this. So here goes, regardless.
Mom, turn it on mute for the next 20 minutes and then come back towards the end.
Yeah. Joking aside, there is a lot of shame around this topic. There's a lot of shame, right? And porn is us trying to meet genuine need in a pretty unhealthy way. And when porn becomes dangerous, it's because that substance has become something we're addicted to. You can, if you disagree, or you can give a better definition, I'm pretty sure you can, please kind of interrupt her if you disagree. But for me, as I've learned to kind of work with, I wouldn't call it an addiction, but I would definitely call it an impulse that I struggle to control, or have struggled to control over the years. It's a question of lust. Alcoholics talk about, and there's 12-step programs for everything these days, right? And so it's really interesting to kind of lean into these and just kind of see what's there to figure out where you are in these spaces. Because everyone's got trauma these days and everyone's addicted to something. And whereas alcoholics, they take the first drink and they're just addicted to alcohol. That's the thing. It seems like people that have a real issue with porn, they're addicted to lust, and they don't have a way to express that. So my journey started very, very young. Working in the news agency as a paper boy. And when the guy was around the corner, he paid me so poorly I could justify it. I would steal sweets all the time. And there was occasionally steal porn mags, and feel so ashamed that I was even able to look through them. I'll just throw them in the bin halfway through my paper round, But the journey sort of began then. And I think CD-ROMs were a thing back in the days, and now it's ubiquitous. Now it's everywhere, and it's kind of within 30 seconds, even less than that. You just need a laptop, a connection, and an internet, and you can access absolutely anything, right? Back then it was not so easy. And I think that's a really, really good thing. So I worry about people that have all this access now. And, but for me, it was a journey of wanting and lusting after the feminine and wanting a release, a physical, obviously, but an emotional release. And for me, I came to realize when I started to really look into what am I doing here? What I really want. And I think what a lot of men want when they reach out, whether it's porn, whether it's, a massage with a little at the end of it, whether it's even, paying for sex. My sense is that there's a lot of repressed emotion that just needs a way out. And that's just a way that it helps. It's not healthy, but underneath that, I think there's a desire for intimacy. And that for sure was the case for me. And it's never truly met, but it gets you somewhere. And so then it becomes something that becomes then cyclical. And it's almost like numbing yourself after a while, just like we numb ourselves. I can emotionally eat a great deal of things. I don't put weight on, which is, a real blessing in disguise. But we numb ourselves by drinking, smoking, drugs, pizza, ice cream, porn. And I'm someone that I'm not like a Russell Brand type, like addictive personality. That I know I haven't got that, but that impulse, that lust, and that desire to be intimate, that's very much there. And it's like, it took me a long time, but it was work, and it was beautiful work by the end. But when I got to a stage where I could just go, okay, I know where this is in my body. I can feel this desire. I can feel this tension. And I have to find another way to resolve that tension, because any kind of desire, any kind of emotional stress shows up as tension in the body, and tension seeks resolution. So do we do the porn thing, which will only end up in one outcome, and a depletion of energy the older we get as well? Or do we do the challenging work of recognizing and then finding a healthy way to express that tension? And that's where other support comes in. And again, I hope people reach out to you, because I'm sure you've got a lot of ideas on how to do that in healthier ways. So that's a bit about my experience, but feel free to delve.
Yeah. When was there a moment in your life where like a light bulb turned on and you realized it was unhealthy? Where there was a moment where you said, wow, okay, this is really not giving me the thing that I'm seeking. It's not fulfilling me in the way that I need. Was there any kind of moment that happened, or was it a slow realization that it just built up over time?
I think I was aware of it to some extent. And the more personal development work I did, the more aware I became of what my actual needs are and how I was going about meeting them in healthy and unhealthy ways. And then with that awareness comes a choice and integrity. Now, integrity alone as a concept and willingness alone isn't enough to just overcome an addiction or an impulse every time. But slowly but surely, there was a sense of, this isn't serving me. And I can see what it's doing. I'm tired. And what is it that I really crave? And that's deep intimacy with a woman that I want to be with. And this is me running away from that. This is me running away into something that doesn't exist, as opposed to taking the tricky step of just asking someone out, or expressing what I would like to experience in bed and giving them a choice, but at least showing up and leading in that sense. So it was more of a slow realization, I think. I can't think of one particular day where I woke up just, in bed surrounded by porn mags and empty ice cream pots and going, what have I done with my life? It was nothing that extreme, thank God.
Yeah,
thank God. And I'll end it there.
yeah, yeah. And it's I will fully admit that I've had those moments where I kind of wake up in a puddle of my own sweat after sitting there for 3.5 hours looking at porn and just drenched in sweat and smells, and I do kind of come to my senses and think, what have I done to myself? So I'm happy for you that you didn't have one of those realizations. But what I also love about your story is that the personal development work that you've done, the inner work of asking yourself these questions of, what are my needs and how am I meeting my needs, and what are the unhealthy coping mechanisms that I'm using to meet these in an unhealthy way and not really fill them, was a way for you to get insight into, hey, this thing isn't serving me. It's not giving me what I want. And I think the other thing that struck me was what you said about there were some of this inner work that you did. It forced you to ask the question, what do you really want? And with a lot of the clients that I work with, that's one of the first things we do is really get clear on, what do you want in life? What do you really want? Behind the money, behind the success and fame, behind the hot girlfriend, what is it you deeply desire? And for so many people, they realize, okay, it's not the money, it's not the attractive girlfriend. It's, I want genuine inner peace. I want to feel fulfilled. I want to be connected to a sense of purpose. I want to have real intimacy, emotional intimacy and connection with someone that I can take off the mask and just be there with. And I think that's such a powerful starting point for so many people is just to say, okay, what do I really want? And are my behaviors actually getting me closer to that? Or are they distracting me from what I really desire?
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I do similar things. That you find though, sometimes it's hard for people to actually figure out what they want. There's such a fog in front of them. And it's like, I don't know, how do I actually find that out? And so when we break it down to manageable needs and desires and how we're currently meeting them, like what lies underneath that, brother? You know? And so that desire for intimacy is what keeps some men kind of buffing their bodies in the gym, you know, to look good, to then, because then they'll have the confidence to be able to go up to the woman that they actually like, because they're not going to be enough otherwise, you know. So beneath that desire, and if they can come from that place, then going to the gym is like a totally cool thing. And maybe you also need to do the, you know, start the work of finding out if maybe she's even interesting, because God knows how many years I've spent obsessing over the idea of a woman because I find her attractive. And that's also like a sort of, I think porn doesn't help with that, you know. It sets ridiculous and unfair, horrible standards of women. And it makes me objectify them, you know. So the work of undoing that is really important, because yeah, we all want more than that. Well, some of us are happy with a trophy wife, but you know, they're not your clients or mine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you know, it's interesting. You kind of paused when you said we, you know, start to objectify, and you said I. And the thing is, you know, there's some of the fascinating studies that I've read, one of which is that when people are engaged in watching porn, the area of their brain that's lighting up is the area associated with viewing objects, not the area associated with viewing people. That there's a different neural pathway, set of neural structures when we're talking to a person, you know, and that kind of neural pathway is not lighting up when we're watching porn. It's the parts of our brain that are associated with looking at objects, like a stapler, a pencil, a cup. And so on a very real neurological level, we are objectifying people when we're engaging with porn. And as you say, it does contribute to these extremely unrealistic expectations that we have, where we start to think, okay, I want somebody that, you know, looks like this, and this, and has this kind of perfect everything. And we lose that connection with, I want to have someone that I connect with on an emotional, spiritual level, someone who I feel safe with, someone who inspires me and makes me laugh. And we just become hyper-focused on the way someone looks.
Yeah, nicely said. It feels like, especially with this objectifying angle you mentioned, it's like they're an object to consume. There's something that we just want to take, and it's a very unhealthy prospect. And there's a lot of the anger that women are experiencing. There's many reasons for it, but it's because they are being made to feel like this. And even though many men listening will go, "That's not me. I don't do that." Maybe not consciously, and maybe not you, but a ton of men do. And so, again, I'm not here to men bash, but we need to kind of understand how women are made to feel when they're continually objectified in that way, and kind of take some responsibility. And again, that doesn't, it's not helpful to say, well, men are wrong, men are bad, men need to do this. It's like, come back to yourself. Like, you can look at a woman, an attractive woman walking down the street, just appreciate her. Like 3 seconds is enough, brother, you know? And then just dial it in, just go back to your life. And that shows you actually have a sense of self-control, as opposed to, I like that, I want to consume that thing, you know, like, and that's kind of the problem. And if we're honest, like, we'll catch ourselves, especially if we're into porn and we're in that space.
One of the big turning points in my life was recognizing the difference between lust and attraction. And that, you know, attraction is this healthy, beautiful thing that we want to experience. Like, hey, I'm attracted to that person. That's a beautiful experience. I might even go and talk to them and tell them and say, hey, I think you're attractive. You know, could I get your number? And there's a very different experience to that of lust, which is this self-centered, I need to have that, and I want to own that. I want to touch that. And it's a very narrow, kind of hyper focused. And the thing about lust is that it becomes, like you need to have that. And if you don't get it, you can't be happy. Whereas attraction is like, oh, that's a beautiful person walking by, and they're beautiful and I can appreciate them. But lust is this feeling that you need, it's this emptiness inside you that you need to fill.
Beautiful distinction. I really like that. Attraction feels like there's a curiosity, there's an expansion. There's like, okay, wow, what is that? And you're going in not to consume or take, but just to kind of inquire and be like, oh, or even like you said, to compliment them. And when that's done skillfully, it'll land skillfully. But women, they pick it up immediately if they're being lusted after. And maybe some appreciate it in the moment, like depends where they're at, right? It's not like illegal or terrible, but a lot of the time that intention to consume is just not appreciated. And it's not the same if a woman were to lust after a man, because there's just, even if you're not interested, there's no threat there. It's just like, no thanks. Whereas if there's a man you're walking down the street and a man that's bigger than you starts to lust after you, that's a very different experience. And that's what we as men need to start thinking about in how we, and again, it's penetration, how we penetrate into the world, how we move with our intention into the world. Women pick up on this stuff. And so is it coming from that lustful place? And if it is, okay, not okay, integrity, dial it in. And don't be ashamed about it. This is the sort of skillful way we need to say healthy shame. It wasn't okay to do that. Come back to a sense of self, and move on, maybe just a tip of the cap and to balance the equation. But, it comes down to us recognizing that. But we can't do that if we don't know the kind of distinction that you're teaching,
Yeah. And, kind of coming back to the topic of healthy masculinity. And one of the things that I appreciate about it is that it's also, it's more attractive when we're in alignment with these healthy ways of being in our masculinity. And so, for example, it's like when we are attracted to someone and able to express that or show that from a place of groundedness and not from this place of grasping or needing to have, that's very attractive. Whereas if we're coming from this place of lust, they can feel that. And that's a very unattractive way of being when we're like, I want you, I need to touch you. And it's just about like, okay, it's unattractive. And a much healthier, more attractive way, if you want to be in connection with someone, is to own it and say, no, I am a sexual being. I am a sexual creature. There's nothing wrong with me feeling this desire for this person, and let me go express it to them, but not from a place of self-centered, needing to own it or have it in some way.
Beautifully put. And hence like the need to practice grounding. And I don't mean like take your shoes off and go and stand on some grass. I just mean like find a way for you. What's a practice? Is maybe that's just being around other men. Maybe that's some form of embodiment practice. Like there's a bunch of different ways. Find one or two that work for you. But again, it would come back to that sense of self-worth and self-esteem. Like a self-worth perspective is just going to be, you're going to be grounded in yourself. You're like, okay, like I'm just going to reach out and maybe they say no and it's okay. Whereas self-esteem, I'm going to feel good if I get that thing, if I can say that to her. It's like this kind of inner outer balance. And so practicing a sense of groundedness, just coming back into your body and your breath and becoming aware of what's going on. Like I teach moon yoga, it's called. It's ancient form of traditional hatha yoga that is done in the evenings. And specifically it's designed in how you move it. It's super accessible for men. It's got nothing to do with flexibility, but it's designed to calm and balance the mind. So you can really see what's going on there. And so how many people do that? How many people, whether it's moon yoga or some form of breathing, actually take the time to sit with themselves or other men and just come into a sense of, here I am, I'm here. I'm not reaching out. I'm completely content just being here with myself in this moment. I can see my own mind and I'm not reacting to it. I'm not being led by it. I'm just fucking here. There's nothing sexier for someone in their feminine wanting to experience polarity and intimacy and connection when you're in that space of deep groundedness, that real presence. So coming back to that sense of what are the benefits of doing this kind of work? Well, when it's healthy men's work, and there's a separate podcast probably, and yeah, I'm going to judge, I've been doing this long enough now, then you're going to come from that place.
If someone's listening to this and they've been following along this whole conversation and they've never been to a men's circle. Yeah. First of all, good on you for your attention span. But let's say they're curious about it, but they're afraid because it sounds daunting to go to one of these men's circles. What would you say to that person?
I'd say, nice to meet you. Thank you for being afraid. You should be. It's very, very normal and typical. Not should be, but it's super, that's just how it is, like, I get it. It means you're about to enter into a space that you're not sure about, and your immune system, your nervous system rather, is doing its job. Cool. Welcome to a healthy response in your body. Follow through. Follow through. Sit down in that circle. And then at the end of it, figure out for yourself, like, did that add something to me? Was I challenged in a healthy way? Did I feel supported? And am I growing? In which case, yeah, cool. Maybe go to another one. Or, okay, that was off. The way that they were talking about a bunch of subjects felt really not in line with how I see the world, actually. And that's not going to aid my growth. That's not actually adding something here. That's not the kind of man that I want to be, or the kind of group I want to be around. Listen to that. You'll be challenged and out of your comfort zone, but still leaning towards that first kind of response, hopefully. Or listen to your gut, your intuition, and be like, yeah, I'm glad I tried it out, but this particular brand was not for me. And then just, continue your exploration. Not every man is going to be interested in or vibe with me and how I teach and lead these circles. For sure not. And that's normal. So just find your, I don't want to say find your teacher, find your tribe is maybe a better word. Find the group of men that are actually supporting you and where you're at, and gently challenging you with what my teacher would call high regard, meaning with respect. Rather than telling you how things should be and how things are. Another one of my teachers talks about inquiry over imposition. If we break those two words down briefly, inquiry, like you come along and I'm giving you a chance to inquire as to what works for you and to get you thinking for yourself. Then we can have healthy dialogue and challenge if it needs to happen, so you can come to your own conclusions. Versus imposition. Men's work is this. This is what it means to be a man. We're going to go do this thing now. And it's like, not so sure that's so helpful. And yet there's, although good intentions out there's a lot of that stuff being preached at the moment too. So again, rounding up my jibber jabber, go along and understand that you're nervous, but follow through at least till the end. You owe yourself that much.
I love a few things about what you said. First, just the, oh, you're nervous? Good, you should be. And it's almost like the nervousness is a sign that you're doing something important for your soul. Like, hey, you're nervous about sitting in a room with men? Good, that's a sign that it's about time, and it's something that maybe you've been needing to do for a while, and to lean into that anxiety a little bit and say, okay, let me push through this and know that it's going to help. And going to help, that's the second thing I left about what you said, is giving yourself permission to disagree with the men's group, or to say, hey, this one's not for me. Because we've all been to retreats or workshops and been like, yeah, I'm not really in alignment with what they're preaching there or what they're doing. And that doesn't mean that no men's group ever is going to be right for you. It might just be that particular one, the way they run it just might not be the one for you. And to give yourself the grace to listen to your own wisdom and say, you know what, if I'm truthful with myself, that doesn't jive with me, and I need to check out a different one. But to not just say, well, that one didn't sit well, so I'm never going to a men's group again.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something you said, which was really inspired, that listening to your own wisdom. Like the men's circles that I've been to run by my friend Malcolm, they taught me a lot. And there are a bunch of rules in men's groups. And again, they tend to vary, but one of the ones he would insist on is never give another man a piece of advice unless he specifically asks for it. We're not here to fix each other. That's what men are fucking ace at doing already. And it pisses women off no end when they just actually need to be heard and understood. And you do that by shutting the fuck up. And that come back to your sense of self. I'm like, okay, I'm just being present for this person rather than I need to fix the tension that I can feel in them. And here's how they need to do it. Like, no, that's not required. Right. And so learning to dial that back is going to be, it is an essential skill, right? Like if you feel that people are telling each other what they need to do and fixing, and like, it's not about advice giving. And by sharing your own experience of what's going on and by being asked helpful, open questions from an inquiry perspective, that will lead every man to his own wisdom. Inside him, he already knows deep down. He's just confused, muddled. I'm just confused, muddled. There's a fog. And the beautiful circle experience is for you to share what's there and for men to go, oh, well, what about this? Or is this a thing for you? And what do you feel like is important here? Yada, 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 until the fog clears. And it's like, there's the truth of it. I'm out of integrity. I need to apologize. Or I should never have let that fucking happen. And it's my fault that it's gone this far. Actually, here's what I need to do. For example, it's not for someone else to go, you need to sort this out. That's just not how effective coaching works, right? And it's certainly not going to build this kind of bond of trust and shared wisdom that men's circles have been experiencing for centuries. Maybe not in Western society, but when men have come together around fires for a very long time, and that's kind of how they were run. Sure, there's a chief, but they're there to facilitate, and then every man would get a chance to speak and share. And then the shared wisdom of the circle comes from having heard everyone's ideas about something and to understand where everybody's at. And so when we bring this down to helping each other, it's not about advice. It's about clearing the fog and just giving every man a chance to actually find their own center and their own sense of power.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is, shame dies when stories are told in safe spaces. And I think that's one of the beautiful aspects of men's groups is it's a safe space for you. Even if all you did was shared, something that you were ashamed of or something that was difficult, you don't even need people to give you advice or to ask you powerful questions. Just the act of going and being able to share that difficulty and that vulnerability is so healing. But just as you say, then, one of the benefits is that, a real good men's group isn't there to give you advice and tell you how you should show up, but just to ask you these questions and hold you in that high regard, knowing that, you have that wisdom within you and you just need that encouragement and people to be there to support you.
Yeah. I mean, that said, like I also run, and it's like shameless product placement, if you will, but I run like a small group, max 6 men. I mean, it's closed container, so it's not open right now. So it's not interesting, probably until you hear this again in September, October. But what we do here is we've got a safe space already. And here there is like a higher sense of challenge. I think this is also a skill that we need to learn to practice more. And it's not appropriate for every men's circle, especially if you're just joining. And then someone is throwing a fucking curveball at you or is saying something like, I don't believe you, or you need to sharpen up with how long you're taking to express yourself. You're in story and I'm not listening to that. You know what I mean? Like there's a depth below sharing emotionally, which a lot of men and a lot of women are just really tired of. I know plenty of women going, I'm so done with women's circles. Everyone just sits there and talks and cries and yeah, like, so there's this kind of level 1, level 2 kind of version of this. And so I've created something which is profoundly beautiful, because then when you've learned how to kind of hold space for each other and find your own truth, then you can start sensing into what's necessary. It's not about advice giving. but it's just like a different level of like going bam and just throwing something at somebody a bit stronger and testing, because that trust is there, and even deeper bonds of trust formed. 6 men have never met before, and suddenly these bonds, kind of really strong bonds, develop, and they love it. I love it. But guess what? I just listened most of the time.
Yeah. I'm smiling so much right now because one of the, we're both coaches, and one of the things I love about coaching, there's two components of it. One is I really believe coaching is not about giving advice or telling people what to do. And so I tell that to all my clients. I'm like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Here to help you find your own answer. And that being said, one of the most powerful things in coaching is challenging your client and being that person that can say, hey, I know you can do better, or I think you should do that. And it comes from this place of challenging them when you hold them in high regard. And I think that almost the difference there, because it is a nuance, the difference between giving advice versus challenging them to live into their greatness. And I think the difference comes when you're giving advice, it's almost like you're telling someone who you don't believe in, and you're saying, I don't think you know the answer, and so I'm just going to tell you what to do. Versus challenging them is almost like, I know you need to do this. You just need someone external to kind of like hold this mirror and challenge you and say, I know you can run this mile in less than 7 minutes or whatever, and I challenge you to try. And it's so beautiful to have a space where someone is there to challenge you because they believe in your greatness. And I think that's what you're talking about there with that nuance of like, yeah, it's not about advice giving, but there are times where it's like, it's great that someone is there to challenge you.
Yeah. And I mean, what springs to mind is what I would call like the entrepreneur's lament, this sense of like having to do it all and feel like you're on your own a lot of the time. It's a big complaint I've heard and I experience. And so that sense of whether it's a coach or someone like holding you and challenging you, it's needed. And there've been times, the times I've struggled of when I've just gone it alone and said, I don't need anyone. Why should I need anyone? I've been able to achieve X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, we constantly need that mirror. And so as much as I might be facilitating and coaching, I need to be in spaces where I'm also held and challenged myself. You know what I mean? It's like, it's,
yeah.
Yeah.
And someone to call you out on your bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's plenty of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, is there anything in the world of men's work, is there anything that you've changed your mind on over the last 5 years or so?
A lot. Having committed to working with men and really focused on that, never shutting the doors to women, but if primarily what I talk about is men's work, that's going to have an impact. I've missed working with women, and I've also really shifted my thinking on this kind of masculine, feminine polarity piece, which I've kind of talked about a bit already, so that I'll be working a lot more with women, teaching them the same things. Like I really question the value and how helpful it truly is to separate men and women so much and teach them these topics from these perspectives, because the impact I'm seeing of teaching men about masculinity and women about femininity is that it's just creating unrealistic expectations of the other, because we are more than one or the other. And my work has been helping men find masculinity, and before that, women find femininity. I've tended to work with women that are quite sort of tough and in that space of high achievement, but they've lost touch with that sense of self that's like self-caring and nurturing. And so through my experience of working with men and women, I'm like, I think we're missing something fundamental when we talk in men's work about training masculinity. And I still use phrases like that because, that's kind of what tends to attract attention. unfortunately. But I do think that the approach that I've shifted to with this spectrum that I talked about is, it's landing with a lot of people, because a lot of people are also going, yeah, like men, a lot of men that I've worked with and talked to are turning away altogether from these expectations that a lot of women that have spent so much time in the feminine space have of men, that they need to be this like masculine divine king, that does all of these things and so fantastic in XYZ. And it's like, you're still putting him in a role, just as there are plenty of women that are just like, I don't even know how to balance. I've got superwoman syndrome, and I don't even know how to balance any of this now. And I don't know how to have a relationship. I don't know what kind of guy to even look for anymore, because of, again, the ideal that's been put out there versus the reality of everyday humans. And sex and idealism and limitlessness really sells, but there are very few people that actually attain these lofty heights. And if they do, it's normally, an Instagram display and a fucking shit show of like confusion and collapse underneath, which, if you meet any of these people, you very quickly find out about. And so I think a lot of people are starting to see through the facade, not just of social media influencers in general, but especially in this poorly taught version of what divine masculine and feminine actually looks like. And so I've decided to take a real stand against that kind of nonsense, because it's just placing more expectations of men to meet a certain ideal, and they have to have a fucking man bun, and they have to be like super ripped and go to cacao ceremonies and wear certain clothes, and like that's what consciousness is. It's like, get fucked. I can be an extremely spiritual individual and just dress like a regular human with like a shirt and a pair of Nikes. Thank you very much. And I don't need to go to this place and be forced to eye gaze with people in order to, but that's kind of the space that we're in now. It's very popular. And I guess I'm not going to appeal to that crowd, but to those that are like, yeah, I don't see this as being helpful, are going to maybe kind of vibe with what I'm saying, because there's real life and there's this kind of this ideal. And I don't know, how do you feel about that? Am I making sense to you?
1,000%. 1,000%. I'm nodding voraciously. Is that voraciously? You can eat something, or you read voraciously? Anyways, I agree with you 1,000%. And it's I'm struck by you're taking a route that is more nuanced and more balanced, and it's not as Instagrammable or TikTokable, where it's like, hey, tap into your divine masculine. It's more like, hey, this is not the spiritual materialism that a lot of people are sick of, where you have to wear your mala beads and wear all white and linen and go to a tantra festival. It's like, you can just be a normal person, and you can ask some of these questions about how to be in a healthier dynamic in your relationship. And it's interesting, one of the things that's coming to my mind, are you familiar with Cam Fraser? He's on, I know him on Instagram, and he talks a lot about sexuality, particularly for men. He talks a lot about different forms of self-pleasuring and masturbation and different ways of kind of tapping into a healthier sexuality. I'm not sure if I agree with everything he says, because some of his stuff is, maybe a little bit out there. But one of the things I saw him say recently, it was just a short clip, and somebody had asked him about polarity. And he said, I don't really like talking so much about polarity anymore, because it can kind of almost, as you're saying, it kind of feeds into this idea that you have to have the king and you have to have the queen, and you have to play these roles. And he said, instead of polarity, I just like to talk about, like, how can you create an authentic connection in a moment where you're both really there and present for each other in the wild dance of intimacy. And that, like, okay, yeah, polarity is cool, but it's like, maybe we're missing the point of just how can you really be there and be present and connect And I thought it was so beautiful that he's taking this thing that it's very sexy. Polarity is a sexy topic in intimacy and all this stuff. And he's just like, yeah, maybe it's missing the point, or maybe it's confusing people. Maybe we should really just talk about how can we connect with each other. And so what you're saying, it kind of strikes me as that is like, maybe this, is helpful, but it can also be distracting. And let's just look at how to be in healthier dynamics with each other.
Yeah, I like the cut of his jib. I to add on, I mean, like, we were making fun out of man buns and sort of tantra events, and I can do that until the cows come home. That's just happily. It makes me laugh. That said, if that's your jam, cool. I mean, I'm just still traumatized from living in Bali. And just being up there recently, and it's just, there's just a different language. And it's like, if that's where you're at and that's what feels right for you, cool. There's a target on your back and I am firing at you. It's just easy fodder. It's fun, like that said, it's all good natured. That said, I think that, when these things, when they become a barrier to entry, they're a problem, right? So a lot of people are like tantra festival, well, if you want to explore that stuff, totally cool, but a lot of people that go down that route often kind of lose themselves in that and then get trapped in these ideals and then get deeply frustrated, sad, and end up like single. And you got a bunch of women in their kind of like 30s, early 40s that like desperately want to have kids, but they can't find this guy. There's many reasons for it. But if the reason, which I've met a few women now, is just like, well, that guy's not there, and I have these expectations of these men. It's like, men have got their own.
He doesn't fit the stereotype
for sure. Yeah, and it's just like, So when it becomes a barrier to entry, that this is kind of when these things are problematic. And as your man Cam said, it's like, look, when there's no barrier to entry, then we can just connect with each other. And I'm not looking at you there. You need to have these qualities because I have these qualities, and you need to be like this stoic guy, and I need to be this kind of like bloating feminine. And what does that translate into in real life? Double standards a lot of the time. But both men and women. Like, okay, I expect a man to pay because the man leads. It's like, whoa. There are going to be men that love that, cool. But again, like a lot of us brought up in Europe are like, sorry, what? And there are a lot of women that are offended when you try to pay for them. They're like, how dare you? Like, I'm emancipated. And you're like, but I thought that's what men do, whether they lead, and I'm just buying you the thing. And, these kind of problems, these kind of conversations can be avoided if there's actually just no expectations, no silly ideals, and we just learn to communicate better and come into connection with each other. And so then it comes down to more useful daily skills that we need to practice, like healthy communication.
Yeah. It's striking me that, in the same way that porn can create unhealthy expectations for men in terms of women's bodies and these things, the hyper spiritual side can create unhealthy expectations for women around what men are supposed to be. These divine masculine who are 6-pack abs and doing cacao festivals and able to also communicate and writing poetry and playing guitar and running a successful entrepreneurial business and able to pay for everything. It's like we have these unrealistic expectations now. If you go too far in either extreme, porn creating unrealistic expectations for bodies, and then some of the spiritual work, if taken too far, can create these unrealistic expectations on the other side.
Yeah. And, I've pointed out some double standards of experience that women have, but, men are also just as guilty of this. It's problematic on both sides. I just really want to level that field, not from a fear of being cancelled, but just from a sense of integrity. Like, we're all learning in the mix here. And it's like, just start listening to yourself a bit more and paying less attention to dreamy ideals, because you're probably being marketed to, and there's probably a product in there. And will it give you what you actually want? That's a really good question.
Yeah. For anyone who's listening to this who is addicted to porn, the majority of the people that listen to this podcast have come because of the interest in the topic of this podcast. Do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to leave with them?
I won't assume that they're wise in any way, but I'll share a few thoughts, and then hopefully someone will find value in them. How about that? All
Sounds
right.
good.
Cool that you're here. You realize that there's something going on for you that's not working. Very cool that you want to do something about it. The level of shame that you probably are feeling, especially around talking to, loved ones about it, is fully understandable. But don't let that stop you from connecting with and sharing with someone. And whether that's a support group, hopefully with this good man here, because, he knows what he's doing, but finding people that actually can and will support you in this, because there is a way out of this, but it starts with you owning the fact that you've got a problem and then sharing that with someone else, and not thinking that you can or should have to deal with it on your own. And I speak from deep experience here. Whether you move into coaching, whether you move into a support group, a 12-step program, it's going to be hard to take that first step, which is showing up somewhere. I guess that's the second step. First step, okay, I've got a problem. I want to do something about it. Second step, I have to share this with someone else. All you're afraid of is the feeling that's going to come up, or a series of feelings. And whatever those feelings are, they're just feelings, and that you're going to be able to move through them. It's not going to be easy. That's the hardest thing you'll have to do. After that, it gets way easier because you'll be supported. And I cannot recommend checking out this man highly enough, not just because he's invited me onto his podcast, but because I know him as a human. You don't have to be alone in this, because that's most of the problem. Thinking we're alone in a situation rather than the situation itself. Amen.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, it's a great place to end. So, Rich, where can people find out? Yeah. So for people who want to get to know a bit more about you and maybe connect, and I know you have some men's retreats coming up. So, total time for you to self-promote a little bit. Where can people find out about you?
Thank you kindly, sir. So on Instagram, I'm not on there on a daily basis, but that's a great way to connect with me. Rich Realign. Realign is my kind of brand company, if you will. re-align.co is my website. You can connect with me in those two places easily. I've got a men's retreat, which I co-run with two great humans, coming up in Denmark, which is like the 5th of September. It's very affordable, very cool experience. We've had amazing feedback. It's the 4th one we are doing, and I'm just the happiest up there. So I'd love to see you up there. And I think on Instagram is probably the best place to find the current offers, whether it's coaching, whether it's any kind of resources, meditations, things like that, as well as this inner circle I mentioned. If you're German, I have an online German circle as well. That's about it for now. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, Jeremy. And I really appreciate you. I really appreciate this conversation. You give me plenty of space to share. And we've touched on some really key topics that I'm passionate about. And the more I talk about them, the more it fires me up. So I hope that anyone out there is listening and has got value out of that, but I have regardless. So thank you, sir.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure people have gotten value, and I know I have. So, I also know that we'll have to have you back on again, because there's a lot of other topics that we didn't have time for today that I'd love to dive into. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. So that's it for today, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Unhooked. We will catch you all on the next episode.